In Yugoslavia, an EC-led convoy heading for the besieged town of Vukovar has come under mortar fire.
You're all going to die, this woman sobbed. Don't go to Vukovar, it's a trap.
We are trying to save Yugoslavia.
This is a nation's struggle for independence. I mean, this is history being made here.
The big guns of the Yugoslav Federal Army trundled through Croatia. A massive convoy of men and heavy armour over 5 miles long. The largest army troop movement we've seen here in weeks. Just overhead, combat air patrols flew close escort through this potentially hostile country. The Croatians have made it clear they don't want the army on their soil. Helicopter gunships scoured the roadsides for any signs of snipers or ambushes. The Yugoslav army are on the move in a very big way today. It's rumoured that these troops are withdrawing from Slovenia through the state of Croatia. But just where they're going to regroup, nobody's quite sure. Although the convoy was heading east towards Belgrade, there was no evidence of the army returning to barracks, though that had been one of the Croatian conditions for a ceasefire. In Belgrade, the federal presidency had finally achieved a cessation of hostilities. Envoys sent to Croatia's disputed areas had won promises from the warring Serbs and Croats to honour a truce. But just how the ceasefire would be policed had proved the most contentious issue. These Croatian guardsmen and the Serbian militias they faced have always found it hard to agree on an independent force acceptable to both sides. But with Europe reluctant to send in peacekeeping troops, the protagonists had been forced to find a mutual solution. If the guns do fall silent overnight, Croatia says it won't break the peace deal.
It will hold for as long as those who have been attacking Croatia and Croatian territories abide by the ceasefire agreement.
For these weary militiamen who've seen weeks of battle and bloodshed, a ceasefire can't come soon enough. They've lost patience with the politicians.
There is just talking and talking and talking, and we're losing our time and our lives.
A Yugoslav army patrol sets off into bandit country, about to monitor the ceasefire in the danger zone where Serbs and Croats have been locked in combat. Crammed inside a personnel carrier with 8 nervous young conscripts and their officer, we spent 3 hours driving through villages which have seen some of the most vicious fighting. Only last night, one of their comrades was shot dead on this same patrol route. The ceasefire was in force, but we saw no signs of either side pulling back. These armed Serbians still manning their barricades seemed relieved to see the army patrol. Leaving the village of Trepanja through another checkpoint, we were back in Croatian-held territory. The APC accelerated rapidly for fear of attack. The soldiers claimed they'd been shot at frequently by the Croats. Army units were in defensive positions between many of the divided communities. The soldiers have orders to stay put until the warring militias withdraw out of range of fire. We saw over 50 tanks dug in, apparently forming a buffer zone to keep factions apart. As we rode into Dal, the scene of last week's fierce gun battle, which left at least 22 dead, there was an eerie calm. The few villagers who hadn't fled used the ceasefire to venture out for the first time. What we witnessed was not the widespread destruction claimed by the Croatians. But at the next village, the patrol turned back. Sarvac, where their friend and fellow soldier had been killed last night, was too dangerous, they said. The road ahead was mined. For them, this Croatian-held village was a no-go area.
Well, we've just completed what's known around here as the Triangle of Terror, without a shot being fired at us, and the soldiers seem pretty surprised by that. They're very sceptical about the chances of this ceasefire holding.
In Osijek, where the patrol is based, there's no love lost for the Yugoslav army. Croatians want the outside world to know they view the army as their enemy. The headlines on ceasefire day were not about peace, but featured an article on how to blow up tanks. Nearby, they were burying 20-year-old Mario Vuknic, one of the Croatian guardsmen killed in that shootout at Dal. Though the mood was one of mourning, the whispers were for revenge. Yet, ironically, as a Serbian funeral procession passed by in the same graveyard, they stood aside respectfully. A poignant reminder that this tragic conflict is being played out amongst neighbours, united in grief but divided by the gun. Jeremy Thompson, News at 10 in eastern Croatia. Training was stepped up today for Croatia's new recruits. All able-bodied men are now on standby for call-up to the National Guard. But it's the mobilization of world support that's become Croatia's top priority, its main hope of preventing more of its young men from dying. Europe's new peace initiative has overtaken Croatia's weekend war deadline. Tank traps stand in readiness around Zagreb, but the government acknowledges that diplomacy could prove its best defense. At the president's palace, they were changing guards and political tactics, gaining confidence from condemnation of the aggression by Serbia and the Federal Army.
It's quite obvious that the Communist Army, is attacking democracy here, and that defending Croatian boundaries means also defending boundaries of free Europe. And it is so evident today that the world have tremendously shifted on our side.
The role of the Federal Army is crucial, but its attitude to the latest peace plan still unpredictable. Croatians admit they're no match for tanks, but believe many soldiers are now demoralized. Outside the army headquarters in Zagreb, mothers renewed the demand for their sons to be released from conscription. There's a growing belief among Croatians that they can win their independence through peace rather than war. Jeremy Thompson, News at 10, Zagreb. The European community is poised to begin the peace process. Its observers are now on standby in Croatia, ready to monitor and guarantee a ceasefire. Dutch Foreign Minister Van den Broek flew into Belgrade in positive mood, knowing that for the first time he had Serbia's backing, the best hope yet of stopping the violence. Though all previous peace initiatives have collapsed, the Serbians are now under immense diplomatic pressure to make this deal work. But on the ground, there's still intense distrust and friction, not helped by the stalemate at Zagreb airport, where federal troops are refusing to hand over a plane load of weapons, which Croatians abroad were trying to smuggle in to help the war effort. The Croatian special forces now have the airport and the army surrounded, and there have been several firefights. As fires burned across Croatia today after yet more battles, the prospects for a truce looked as gloomy as ever. The Serbian guerrillas who destroyed this Croatian town may well prove beyond the control of their political leaders. Although there are some fresh grounds for optimism, no previous ceasefire here has worked. Everyone now admits the week ahead could be the most critical since the conflict in Croatia began, the making or the breaking of the peace. Jeremy Thompson, ITN, Zagreb.
Yugoslav Air Force jets bombed Croatian positions today, despite the latest ceasefire sponsored by the European community. The federal authorities in Belgrade blame the Croatians for breaking the truce.
Another Croatian town left in ruins. A grim new morning for the residents of Petrinja revealed the terrible damage inflicted by yesterday's battle.
It had all started yesterday afternoon when troops in Petrova's army barracks claimed they'd been attacked by Croatian militias. News teams invited for a press conference by the army found themselves trapped in crossfire. Local Serbian residents ran into the barracks seeking cover, shouting that 3 children had already been killed, while tanks roared out to strengthen the defences. Soon the casualties were coming in as more names were added to the death toll in Croatia. The vital highway between Zagreb and Belgrade was at a standstill tonight. Serbian militiamen had reportedly taken control after a gun battle with Croatians and set up roadblocks. No traffic was allowed to pass. It was a serious blow to Croatia, not only severing its main trade artery to the south, but effectively cutting the republic in two, as the Serbians attempted to redefine Croatia's borders. They also seemed intent on crippling Croatia's economy. Today there were attacks on a steelworks and an oil refinery near Sisak. The continued fighting has made a mockery of the ceasefire. Behind the barricades, Croatian part-time guardsmen shored up their defences against the relentless Serbian advance, too busy to even care about Europe's peace plan. They don't believe it has a hope. As they patrolled the front line around Osijek, there was a lull in the fighting, but the damage had already been done. This latest aggression by the Serbians could be a last-ditch effort to strengthen their hand before they're forced to the negotiating table. Or it could be a quite deliberate attempt to sabotage the ceasefire. Either way, it doesn't augur too well for the peace process. Jeremy Thompson, News at 10, Zagreb.
Battle is being fought this afternoon in the Yugoslav Republic of Croatia for control of the town of Osijek, now surrounded by Serbian and federal troops. A massive force of Croatian National Guards have set out to try to recapture the key road that joins East and West Croatia. It had been cut off by Serbian guerrillas.
For the Croatian troops, this was the big one, as hundreds of special forces massed for a decisive showdown with the Serbians. A current war fueled by past ethnic hatred. The battle song was that of the Ustaša, Croatia's old fascist militia, which supported the Nazis 50 years ago. This nationalist army of part-timers set off to war in their buses, vans and lorries, determined to repel the advancing Serbians and the Federal Army. Their only heavy armour, a homemade tank. Facing them behind Serbian barricades, real army tanks, which had driven a wedge through central Croatia, splitting the republic in two. The Croatians prepared to attack the Serbians, now blocking the main Zagreb-Belgrade motorway. If they failed, they said the Serbians would take more of their land.
The Croatian soldiers see this as a holding operation, a chance to give their politicians time to try and work out a peaceful settlement. But if that fails, they see only one option: all-out war.
At times, it's hard to tell the difference. Mortars hitting central Osijek as continued fighting made a fiction of the ceasefire. Jeremy Thompson, ITN, Croatia.
Lord Carrington, the signs from Yugoslavia overnight scarcely encouraging. Do you think, as things stand, it's really worth going ahead with this conference on Saturday?
Well, the community ministers said on the 3rd of September that the peace conference would take place if the ceasefire held, and that seemed to be an important part of the peace progress. But I think probably the conference on Saturday will go ahead, because I think that we must do everything possible we can to stop the fighting, which seems to have got worse yesterday and today.
Are you willing to sit in the chair while there's still fighting going on the ground?
Well, I think I mean, you can, of course, but I think it's much more difficult to visualize an atmosphere in a conference which is conducive to coming to conclusions which mean concessions on both sides when there is fighting going on, people getting killed. So I think that the community must do what it can to get the fighting stopped if there really is a chance of the conference being successful.
But are you going to be willing to point the finger of blame if, for example, it appears that it's Serbia that's obstructing the process?
I don't think it's for me to point a finger of blame. I mean, my purpose is to have a conference in which we can look at the future. I mean, this is not a conference in which you impose solutions on people. It's for the Yugoslavs themselves to decide how they want what they want to emerge. They've got to put up their ideas, and then we've got to knock them together. If we've got some ideas as well, we'll put them up so they can have a go. But it must be, in the end, acceptable to the people of Yugoslavia as a whole, the people concerned in Yugoslavia.
The Foreign Secretary Douglas Hurd has warned that Europe is on the edge of disaster because of the crisis in Yugoslavia. He said the EC-sponsored peace talks, which began in The Hague today, must not be allowed to fail. The conference chairman, Lord Carrington, warned of considerable difficulties in achieving peace, but the sides did agree to further talks.
Demonstrators from Croatia, where the heaviest fighting has occurred, took to the streets of The Hague to plead for an end to the bloodshed they blame on Serbia and the Yugoslav Federal Army. They picketed the aptly named Palace of Peace, where Lord Carrington called Yugoslavia's warring republics together. Opening the conference, the European Community chairman warned of outright civil war.
If this conference wants to stand a chance of success, the fighting must stop. Talking and shooting do not go together.
But the opening exchanges were bitter, the Croatian president accusing Serbia of waging a dirty, undeclared war against his republic, the Serbian president accusing Croatia of state terrorism and illegal secession.
Moreover, their policy of secession has opened up the problem of frontiers, sovereignty, and violation of human rights, which led to conflict and bloodshed.
The opening session underlined the differences to be resolved and the difficulties the conference chairman faces.
I hope that I've always been realistic about the difficulties which are obvious in the problems of Yugoslavia. I think that they were stated very clearly this morning, but I don't think they come as a great surprise.
The present Foreign Secretary said Europe was on the edge of disaster, and he issued this warning.
Those who seek to alter frontiers inside Yugoslavia by force are not going to find the results of that are accepted. It's not going to work.
So the conference has opened, and with it, the war of words. But the differences between Serbs and Croats may already be too deep for the peace process to heal. Kevin Dunn, ITN, The Hague.
There were renewed clashes in Croatia despite the peace talks. At least 2 Croatian National Guardsmen were killed in fighting near Okučani, where Federal Army units and Serbian guerrillas have blocked the main Zagreb to Belgrade road.
Croatian guards leapt into action as the rattle of machine guns put the peace talks in perspective. Fighting still took precedence as long as Croatia was under threat. The 3-day battle for control of the Republic's main highway had become a hazardous scrap for every yard of territory. But the lack of training was all too apparent as they struggled to come to terms with newly acquired munitions. While the politicians argued, more soldiers died, laying down their lives to give their leaders time to find a solution to this almost intractable conflict. So far, the combat has been confined to provincial Croatia. Today, the sirens were blaring in Zagreb. This time, though, it was only an exercise, the civil defense demonstrating how it would cope with an attack on the city. Though the threat was distant, the defenses were being stepped up. Beneath old Zagreb, a Second World War air raid bunker was opened up for the first time in 45 years. Now it's not Allied bombing they fear, but Yugoslavia's own air force. Inside, there's shelter for 4,000 people. The citizens of Zagreb pray it won't be needed.
Though they're still hoping that the European peace plan will render these war preparations unnecessary, the Croatians are taking no chances. Jeremy Thompson, ITN, Zagreb.
Just across the river Sava inside Bosnia, a war memorial that explains much of the historic hatreds that once again are racking Yugoslavia. In a woodland clearing, the mass graves of 360,000 people slaughtered by the Ustasha, Croatia's Nazi collaborators in World War II. Most of the victims who lie beneath this killing field are Serbians. In the nearby village, those old ethnic fears have been revived. These Serbians, now sheltering in Bosnia, had fled their village just across the bridge in Croatia. They were refugees barely half a mile from home. Peter Stankovic and his friends told us they'd lost everything: jobs, houses, and hope. Croatian neighbours had become their enemies. Once again, Serbs and Croats were finding it hard to live side by side. Now, 200 of them were camped out with friends in Donja Gradina, doubling the village's population. Muklia showed us round the outhouses and cattle sheds where his family were forced to sleep for lack of space. There's no power or water and barely enough food. So far, the crisis has only tainted the fringes of rural Bosnia. But local leader Milenko Tubica believes the violence could easily spill over in flaming ethnic passions in his republic. Bosnia is a potentially explosive mix, not only Serbs and Croats, but a Muslim majority and a near-bankrupt economy. There were huge queues for petrol today. Bosnia has always relied on neighbouring Croatia for its fuel and other basic needs. But Croatia has all but closed its borders. Just one bridge remains open across the river to Bosnia, and the only export now is trouble. What worries the people here is that today's suffering just across the border in Croatia could be tomorrow's problem for Bosnia, as ethnic friction threatens to throw another Yugoslav republic into chaos. Jeremy Thompson, ITN, in Bosnia.
The helicopter carrying the European Community's peacemaker in Yugoslavia, the Dutch diplomat Mr. Henri Wijnands, was shot at from the ground. ITN's Michael Nicholson was on board. The helicopter was flying from Zagreb to Okučani when bullets passed through the cockpit just before it was due to touch down. The pilot had to make an emergency landing with fuel pouring from one of its tanks.
Henri Wijnands, Dutch ambassador to Paris, today felt a long way from home. He has the job of clearing the way for European Community observers to monitor the ceasefire, and he does it at some risk to himself. Last week, his helicopter was fired on. Today, as we flew with him to Okučani to report yet another ceasefire, we took direct hits. As the pilot maneuvered, bullets came in one side and out the other. None of us was hit. But after an emergency landing, we saw that our fuel tank had been ripped open. Had it exploded, no one would have survived. Meeting Croats and Serbs to negotiate a ceasefire at local level is not easy when the Federal Army acts as your chaperone. The Croats regard this army as fighting with the Serbs to crush their breakaway republic. At Okučani, only the Serbs came to hear what he proposed.
So when there's an incident, when a mina falls somewhere, when somebody has been ambushed, they bring the parties together, try to solve the incident. So I should like to hear from the gentleman. And again, I'm here just as a mediator.
But even as the mediator talked, the local truce agreed for his arrival abruptly ended, and the shooting began again a mile away. With the European Community negotiated ceasefire in the offing, the Croats are determined to recover lost territory, the Serbs just as eager to win it. The ambassador saw it for himself today. So did this make his mission mean anything?
Well, what is your suggestion? I mean, one day these people will have to sit together, talk it out at a local level, because I think this is a rather local but rather heavy incident, and sort it out.
And in the replacement helicopter that took us safely away, Ambassador Wijnands saw what happened when they can't. The wounded in the fighting he'd come to stop in a war that almost claimed him as a casualty. Michael Nicholson, News at 10, Croatia. It was our bad luck to be hit by the last salvo of rockets in the overnight blitz. One hit the third floor, room 306 was blown to pieces. I was in 308. 3 reporters were wounded, and we were trapped by fire from the lift shafts until shrapnel fortunately burst the water mains and put the flames out. The all-night bombardment lasted 14 hours. Over 250 rockets and mortars hit the city. It's the worst since the siege began a fortnight ago. And nobody pretends it will not get worse. The people of Osijek now take their dinners and their bedding to community shelters, mostly underground car parks, just as soon as it gets dark. Last night, mothers were especially grateful they did. Others, like the Gonbolovic family, are lucky enough to have their own cellar. Once baby Luka is fed, they descend. But last night, the air raid sirens began early, and Luka had his bottle below.
No one leave this town.
Not even the war can drive you away.
We'll see.
The hospitals are randomly hit. This has been mortared 6 times. The beds upstairs are made up, but they remain empty. Nowadays, every new patient, every new casualty takes their place on the cellar floor below with the others. Some haven't seen daylight for 14 days. It's almost certain if this bombardment continues, some will never see it again. Today, very little dared to move on the streets of Osijek. What did was shot at. The fighting has imposed its own 24-hour curfew, and this city, like Croatia, is slowly being torn to shreds by an ethnic ambition to go it alone. Michael Nicholson, ITN, in Osijek. For the first time in the 2.5 months since Croatia declared its UDI, Zagreb is preparing to defend itself. They worked throughout the night to seal off the city. By this morning, all major roads leading into Zagreb were barricaded. They served 2 purposes: to stop the federal army coming in and to stop it leaving, which adds to the general confusion. The Croats accuse the federal army of trying to crush their independence. The federal army has a divisional strength garrison in Zagreb, and the Croats have cut off their water and power to force it to surrender. 2 smaller besieged supply barracks have done exactly that. Abandoned this morning, the Croatian, not the federal flag, flies over them, and 45 soldiers have surrendered. Pictures like these will not amuse the federal army generals, and surely soon they must retaliate. What then will pump-action shotguns and hunting rifles do against tanks and rockets? The Croats are tightening a noose that could strangle them. A bleak September day, the prospects even bleaker. There were Croatians in this, their capital city, who were confident they could establish their breakaway republic without even being touched by war. They are not so confident today. Michael Nicholson, ITN, in Zagreb.
Good evening. Europe's peace envoy, Lord Carrington, today won a ceasefire agreement from Yugoslavia's warring factions. They said it was one last chance for peace, with the country only days away from irretrievable civil war. The Croats immediately responded by ordering their blockade of federal army barracks to be lifted. These are today's other main developments in the Yugoslav crisis. Sporadic fighting has continued around the Croatian capital Zagreb. A Yugoslav Air Force plane has been shot down, and Croatia's ports have been blockaded. The Yugoslav Navy threatened to sink any ships trying to sail from the 7 main ports along the Adriatic coast.
They came here in a hurry, all sides knowing well enough that this was almost certainly their last chance of salvaging something from the European Community's peace initiative. Until now, Serb and Croat had seemed as far apart as ever. The Croatian President Tudjman repeating that unless the fighting ended, he would withdraw from the community peace efforts. And the Serbian President Milosevic adamant that what the Serbs had taken they would keep, with the federal army turning a blind eye. The Serbs have split Croatia apart, controlling now nearly a third of the country. And what the Croats fear is a permanent change in the map, that they will be negotiated out of territory as the price of peace. After only 4 hours of discussion, it ended with the Croat and Serb signing yet another ceasefire, but this time with Lord Carrington's warning that this was their last chance.
What did you threaten that made them slightly more compromising than they had been before?
I didn't threaten anybody with anything. I told them what I believe to be the realities, which is that this is the last chance and the responsibility rests with those 3 people. And I think they fully understood that.
Is there a chance that you might recommend that the army, a European army, comes in to kind of keep the two sides apart? Is that a possibility?
I don't see a military intervention in this situation.
You don't?
But that's not for me to decide.
What is surprising is just how quickly the two sides signed this piece of paper. Surprising, that is, if we are to believe it will have any effect where the fighting is. If it does, then Lord Carrington will have pulled off something quite remarkable. If he hasn't, then we can expect this fighting to develop into its new and final phase of slaughter. Michael Nicholson, ITN, Igalo, Montenegro.
The very first sign that something was going badly wrong with the peace accord came just before midnight. Flares lit the way for an Air Force jet to launch rockets at a radio mast outside Zagreb. The air raid sirens had sounded too late, and the anti-aircraft batteries opened up. In the distance to the east of the city, a large fire on an industrial estate burned throughout the night. It's thought the plant was hit by shells from inside a nearby Federal Army base, which Croatians have been laying siege to for nearly a week. By this morning, all was quiet. There was no activity at this army base, and although there have been 2 air raid alerts this morning, the planes have not been seen here yet. The damage reports are still coming in. It's considered too dangerous for people to go too close to the military installations which were at the heart of last night's fighting. But damage there is. This clothing factory was one of several to come under attack. The bullet holes show clearly where the snipers were aiming. Damage from shelling means that it'll be weeks before anything is produced here. Zagreb is now considered too dangerous even for the EC monitors to venture out for the time being. Last night, the Danish representative was shot in the leg by a Croatian National Guardsman near the Federal Army headquarters.
The commander of the National Guard has apologized, and the matter will be investigated fully by the monitor mission. This incident does not give cause to modify the way in which the monitor mission has been operating up to now.
The European community, like the people of Yugoslavia, are now waiting to see if and how this conflict can be resolved. It's now 12 o'clock, and yesterday's peace agreement is officially in operation. All the fighting has to stop. But after last night's episode, there's little confidence here that the peace brokers wield enough power to silence the guns. Jessica Gooch, ITN, Zagreb.
Miles of armour moves on Croatia, peace talks on hold. Good evening. The Yugoslav crisis deepened this afternoon in the country itself and on the diplomatic front. A 6-mile-long column of tanks, troop carriers and artillery left the Yugoslav capital Belgrade for Croatia. The Yugoslav defence minister accused Croatian forces of violating the 2-day-old ceasefire and of blockading army barracks. Peace talks in The Hague broke down, with Serbia rejecting an EC request to send a peacekeeping force to Yugoslavia.
It was the sighting of a 6-mile column of tanks and armoured personnel carriers leaving Belgrade which put the latest dent in hopes of a lasting ceasefire. It was heading along the main motorway towards Zagreb, cheered by crowds of Serbians who threw food to the troops and wished them luck. Their route will take them through Slavonia, the scene of some of the fiercest battles before the latest ceasefire. Earlier today, across the other side of Croatia, southwest of Zagreb, that ceasefire was breached in a shelling incident at an oil refinery. It was one of a number of sporadic attacks across the Republic, but largely today has remained quiet. In Zagreb itself, which had a peaceful night, people returned to the streets and the roadside cafes. But the tension remains. Here on the outskirts of the city, Croatian soldiers continue their blockade of the Marshal Tito barracks, forcing Federal Army soldiers to remain inside. A maze of iron roadblocks has been erected nearby, fortified by mines. This evening in the city, the pressures are beginning to mount. Gunfire could be heard in streets around here a few minutes ago, and the people are anxious that that column of tanks and armoured personnel carriers is on its way here tonight. Terry Lloyd, ITN, Zagreb.
Well, a few moments ago, Michael Nicholson, who's on the Croatian border, sent this report, confirming that the convoy has now actually moved into Croatia.
Tonight, the lead vehicles in the longest armoured convoy to have been seen anywhere in Yugoslavia since the Second World War has entered Croatia 20 miles south of Vukovar. It is by far the biggest mobilization of the Federal Army since this civil war began nearly 3 months ago. 20,000 men and more are on the move, with over 500 tanks and armoured personnel carriers. I counted more than 100 large field guns and as many more machine guns and rocket launchers. Troops I spoke to say they are on their way to Vukovar and Osijek, which is well inside Croatia. Michael Nicholson, ITN, Serbia.
The breakdown of the peace talks in The Hague came when European ministers demanded a ceasefire in Yugoslavia. But the foreign minister of the Yugoslav Federation insisted that the peace conference would go on despite the fighting.
The Franco-German call for the UN to back a European peace force came as EC foreign ministers arrived in The Hague to discuss the issue. Douglas Hurd will demand tough preconditions if such a force is to be sent, including the need for all sides in the Yugoslav conflict to welcome foreign troops. Ministers from Serbia and Croatia attending Lord Carrington's peace conference, now adjourned until the ceasefire holds, quickly showed there was no universal wish for outside intervention.
It is not in the Serbian tradition to have any sympathy for foreign military presence in the country. For that reason, we don't have the sympathy for any such a proposal.
Croatia, on the receiving end of the bombing, called for European community help.
To send peace-keeping and, if possible, peace-making forces. We know that it's not an easy case.
European ministers discuss a military force tonight, but after Lord Carrington's advice that peace prospects remain shaky, they'll find it difficult to reach a firm conclusion. Geoffrey Archer, ITN, The Hague.
Mike, what is the latest on that convoy?
Well, we have no latest. It's way up the road, about 150 kilometres. Our latest report, and it's very hard to get reports here, John, because nobody in Yugoslavia seems to know about this convoy officially. It hasn't been broadcast on the radio or on television, so the only people who really know about it and seen it have been people like us reporting it and people like you watching it outside the country. But my information is that it's beyond the town of Šid, which is just inside the Yugoslav border, but the main thrust, the forward tanks, are well inside Croatia and may at this moment now be moving much closer and perhaps even into the suburbs of Vukovar. I'm just about, when I finish speaking to you, to jump in a car with the crew and go up and to try and find it and see exactly where it is.
The implication clearly being that it's heading for Croatia to put an end to the fighting.
Well, that would seem to be the most sensible interpretation, John. I can't see why else the Federal Army should mount what is, after all, the biggest mobilization of men and armour since the Second World War. I think you may have seen the pictures we had on ITN last night. It was 50 miles long and took about 5 hours to pass it. I've never seen a convoy like it. And my cameraman, Chris Squires, who covered the Gulf, was also slightly amazed at the size of it. My feeling is, having seen it yesterday and having spoken to people today, is that the army is going in there to deliver a big clout.
And Mike, is it your impression that the army is acting unilaterally? Has it abandoned the politicians?
I think it has abandoned the politicians both inside Yugoslavia and outside Yugoslavia. They have gone way beyond what their role as mediator and kind of piggy in the middle role is. They are now taking the initiative. What we saw yesterday and what is happening today up in Croatia, eastern Croatia, around Vukovar and possibly now Osijek, is the army adopting a new get-tough role.
Mike, thanks very much indeed.
Good evening. The Federal Army commander in Yugoslavia told ITN tonight he'd ordered troops into Croatia to rescue his soldiers besieged by Croatian forces. He said he'd enter any city to free them. There's been fierce fighting all day. Federal and principally Serbian troops with tanks have crossed over into Bosnia-Herzegovina. The president of Bosnia ordered its own territorial defence units mobilised. The Yugoslav president, the Croatian Mr. Stipe Mesic, said there'd been a general's coup. He appealed to troops to desert, not to fight. France and Germany said the United Nations Security Council should meet about Yugoslavia. The Serbian troops, which crossed into Bosnia, a mixed republic of Serbs, Croats and Muslims, seemed to be headed for Croatia's Adriatic coast. Federal gunboats blockading Split were reported to have hit a British merchant ship. The armoured column, which headed out of Belgrade yesterday for Šid, crossed into eastern Croatia, spreading out to attack Vukovar, Vinkovci and to threaten Osijek. ITN's Michael Nicholson was with the federal Serbian troops.
Yesterday's enormous armoured column is still being added to. On the Zagreb highway we saw hundreds more supply trucks moving west, 10 miles of them bumper to bumper, among them commercial lorries commandeered to take fuel, food and ammunition forward. The Federal Army has established its garrison at Šid on the Serbian-Croatian border. But going by yesterday's count of tanks, armoured personnel carriers and field guns, and we saw over 600 of them, about a third were here. The rest have been split into 3 columns moving deeper into Croatia, west and northwest, bombarding villages and towns ahead of them. We could see clearly enough where the damage was and then what it was. Borovo Selo on the outskirts of Vukovar, where the Croats had tried to stop the tanks with mines. It stopped none of them. The Serbian irregular forces were slowly clearing the way forward of those Croats who had tried to resist the advance. They did not. Passing back through Šid, we saw a trainload of light tanks arrive, over 50 of them, and with them came their crews who shouted, "We are going to bloody the Croats' nose." Now it seems the generals are stopping at nothing so that they can. If there are some politicians in and outside of Yugoslavia who consider this country to be dead, then the generals here think otherwise. After all, the Federation was the creation of one of their own, whose portrait and whose legend is big in every barracks, Marshal Tito. The generals have watched the politicians here pull this country apart. They now are waiting to impose their own solution. And under Tito's picture, General Veljko Kadejević, who gave the order for the tanks to go in, denied that that implied a war on Croatia. "I did it," he said, "on the orders of the president. I am not acting on my own, but my patience has run out." General, can we expect to see tanks on the streets of the big Croatian cities?
Our people must be freed. There are many ways, but there is one which is quite simple.
Poštivati ono što smo potpisali u Igalu.
That's what we signed at Igala, be abided by, and that's it.
Yes, and the other way is very bloody.
A drugi način je vrlo krvav.
And those newly arrived tanks waiting at Šid station is proof enough that General Kadejević will use that option if necessary. Michael Nicholson, News at 10, Serbia.
President Franjo Tuđman visited frontline troops whose task it is to hold the main highway linking Zagreb and Belgrade. Dressed in battle fatigues himself, he told them the war had started and they must defend their land.
We shall fight and defend Croatia. And I hope that Europe would wake up.
His Defense Department, meantime, was dismissing reports that the armoured convoys had entered Croatia to liberate Federal Army troops. They were here, said a spokesman, to take the Republic step by step. Earlier, the capital had its taste of war as 3 separate air raid alarms were sounded. Shoppers herded together and ran to find shelter. One special place was already reserved for dozens of babies who were hastily transferred from wards at a city maternity hospital to underground rooms where they were packed side by side. Nearby, their anxious mothers gathered, waiting to be reunited when, eventually, the all-clear came. The Croatians claim tonight that 48 enemy planes set off on bombing raids today, but as yet this city remains unscathed. Meanwhile, there are reports that a fresh column of tanks and armoured personnel carriers set off from Montenegro and is travelling through Bosnia towards Croatia's southern borders. Terry Lloyd, News at 10, Zagreb.
The Federal Army's massive armoured column, which split 3 ways yesterday, has split again, with dozens of units now spread out across eastern Croatia. Most, as we discovered today, have taken up positions well dug in around the cities of Osijek and Vukovar. If they are preparing themselves for something, they look very casual about it. It's almost as if they are expecting the Croats to move first. The Croatian president's new ceasefire initiative probably explains the waiting. Borovo Selo is on the outskirts of Vukovar. It is now the front line, and it shows. This man, the local baker, refuses to leave his house, even though it was mortared 4 times yesterday. He is only one of a dozen who've remained in this part of town where thousands once lived. And he illustrates the tragedy of this war of ethnic hatreds. He is a Croat, bombed by Croats, because he happens to have married a Serb and lives among them. With Vukovar only 4 miles away, these tanks could be there in, 20 minutes, and to Osijek in about 30. But so far, they've done nothing more menacing than to point their guns in both directions. Maybe the generals are hoping that with this show of force, they won't have to go any further, that a ceasefire will be agreed and their garrisons relieved. Maybe this is not so much a stalemate as a standoff. That is until further notice. Michael Nicholson, ITN, on the Croatian-Serbian border.
Dawn at Osijek, seen from the only road now open into the town. Despite being surrounded by Serbian federal forces on 3 sides, the rush hour looks much as normal, including one of the very few passenger trains still running in Croatia. Osijek, the capital of the eastern region of the state, has continued to function despite being the focus of some of the fiercest bombardment from federal forces dug into the east, north and south. On the eastern fringes of town, Daniel Babic was angry. He'd just coped with a recent tank barrage on Osijek's oil depot, which he runs. The main container here burnt for 3 days and nights after federal forces attacked from across no man's land 2 miles away. It's believed it was retaliation for Croatia closing a pipeline into Serbia. Who fired the rocket?
It is responsibly Yugoslav army and genetics and Serbo communists. It's very not clever men.
Why did
stupid boys, stupid. They don't love Croatia.
Beneath the town centre, Osijek's hospital now functions underground. Its basements become wards because artillery and aerial bombardments continue. These men were all Croatian militias injured in clashes.
I was hit by a sniper in Osijek. He was firing from across the river, from Baranja.
I was hit by shrapnel from a howitzer, here and here.
Outside, it's obvious enough why the beds are below ground. A doctor here said the damage was done as Croats fought to seize the local barracks. The hospital was in the way.
Because it is 100 meters and it was directly from there to here.
Now, when that happened, were there soldiers firing from the hospital to the barracks?
No.
On one side of the road, the wrecked barracks, and on the other, destroyed houses. It was clear that as Croats fought to seize the federal barracks, Osijek had witnessed a firefight of enormous proportions. Inside the barracks, Tito's statue somehow survived it all. There were no guards here, so we went in and came upon a scene of complete destruction. An armoured personnel carrier abandoned where it had stood as federal troops fled, surrendered, or died. Ammunition boxes strewn about in makeshift barricades. Caps left where they'd fallen during the assault. Even half-eaten rations by a foxhole. The armory had been ransacked by Croats after they'd taken control, though live mines and rockets still remained among the debris. In the offices, dust covered maps and papers of the 12th Proletarian Division. Outside, the rumble of continued shelling, inside abandoned insignia. Equipment for maintaining the 12th Division's materiel lay abandoned much as they'd left it. Only the bodies and weapons had been taken away. As those who could flee in tanks did so, they left many other vehicles lacking armour to the effects of incoming rocket-propelled grenades. The firing's still going on, even though this barracks has been liberated. Indeed, it's been comprehensively destroyed. But outside Osijek, we've been told there are at least 2 barracks still occupied by federal forces surrounded by Croatian militia. Now, whilst that's the case, it's clear today in Osijek that neither the Croatians nor the Serbian-dominated National Army have much interest in abiding by a ceasefire. The noise of gunfire rolled across the river east of Osijek, where the bridge is down, severing the town from the Baranja region, where fighting continued all morning, a mockery of the ceasefire elsewhere. And on the road south from Osijek, one of the tanks that fled the barracks stopped in its tracks by a rocket. Small numbers of Croatians hold the northern part of this village, Tienja, whilst federal forces maintain a garrison to the south. It's 1 mile down this road, but as we moved forward, snipers opened up, preventing further progress. Croatian militias here think the ceasefire's a joke. It's not happening and they don't want it anyway. Emil told us he'd now learned to distinguish between the stench of animal and human corpses in these abandoned houses. And across the fields another puny frontline defence and similar message about ceasefire.
We are in our country, it's Croatia. We are Croatian soldiers. We're fighting for freedom.
So you don't want ceasefire?
No.
Here from their trench they could see at least 2 federal tanks. They thought there might be 20 more, so we told them in fact the figure's nearer 50. Not that it'll make any difference. They want to fight on here, and having taken Osijek's barracks, they believe they can win. Alex Thompson, ITN, Croatia. In the Croatian capital Zagreb, the blockade of federal army garrisons continues. Roadblocks surround the Marshal Tito barracks just outside the city, though it's clear any new ceasefire deal requires that the blockade ends at midnight tonight. A similar stalemate exists at the nearby Borongaj barracks. The Croats say they won't lift the blockade till the federal army ends its bombardments. The federal army says they won't pull back till the barracks are no longer surrounded. Around Zagreb, the effects of last night's airstrikes are obvious enough. Fuel tanks still burn at this factory, and the Republic's presidential palace is extensively damaged. The federal military has denied ordering the attack, even suggesting Croatian forces are to blame.
The Federal Air Force didn't bomb the Croatian presidential palace. This is a lie. This is another piece of disinformation to put the Federal Army down in world opinion.
To the southwest of Zagreb, a similar standoff continues at Karlovac, surrounded by 3 large federal barracks. Karlovac has become the key battleground in the struggle between Croatian and federal forces. Even makeshift ambulances have become casualties of war. One of Serbia's few independent journalists now says there'll be no lifting of the blockade, which will lead to intensified warfare.
Right now they are lost in space and they are liable to any form of panic. Well, I would bet that in the final analysis the excessive use of firepower against civilians, undefended cities, etc., is a form of panic.
Even if Croatia's political leaders do agree to end the surrounding of the federal barracks, it's still not clear whether that's actually going to happen on the ground. And that doubt stands between the skirmishing of the past months and full-scale civil war. Alex Thompson, ITN, Belgrade. Few soldiers in Vukovar thought the latest peace deadline would make much difference to their war. At 11 o'clock this morning, 11 hours after the deadline passed, the rumble of cannon fire, artillery and machine guns opened up again over this strategic Croatian town. But I thought there's supposed to be a ceasefire. What's happening? They shrugged. Many here told us outright they wanted the federal army to take more Croatian territory. Some soldiers, still plainly recovering from injuries, were back at the front line this morning. We watched as reinforcements arrived along the only road into Vukovar that the federal forces control. Because of sniper fire in the area where we were sheltering, we could get no further down this road, but the smoke up ahead betrayed the fact that there are still a few things left to burn and destroy in the ruins of Vukovar. We came here this morning to try and observe a ceasefire in Vukovar, which the Yugoslav army has been fighting over for 2.5 months with the Croatian forces in the town. Instead of finding a ceasefire, we find ourselves in the middle of yet another artillery battle. The federal army may have retaken their barracks at Vukovar, but this siren warned of incoming sniper and mortar fire. Soldiers here took shelter in what's their officers' mess, their command centre and a bunker, all in one. Their leaders said the Croats had offered a 100,000 Deutschmark bounty on his head.
The people have to decide whether they want the Yugoslav army or not. We shall only go when the people want us to go.
Outside, it was clear from the sniper fire and artillery bombardments that the federal soldiers control little of Vukovar beyond the barracks itself. As these soldiers pointed out the damage Croatian militias had inflicted to their barracks, they said the reason they couldn't gain control of Vukovar was because the Croatians moved around in a network of tunnels and catacombs. Except for a tank, the only way further into Vukovar for these soldiers was in this, an armoured personnel carrier. This medical team had a report that one of their number had been severely wounded in the town. They got the wrong location and for some moments were trapped again by sniper fire.
This is still not the end of the war. We've not carried out all our tasks. The mission is to win Vukovar.
But for the Croats, the ruins of Vukovar are now a symbol of their militia's ability to keep the might of the Yugoslav army at bay for months.
Vukovar is for 2 months already sort of Gallipoli for Serbian reserves. It is very interesting that the General Staff and Ministry of Defense don't release, and never did in past 2 months, the totals of army and Serbia regular casualties around Vukovar. Our reporters from the spot are talking about hundreds and hundreds.
If the EC really believes peace is at hand, then something ominous is happening tonight at Vukovar. As we left, at least 30 coaches full of soldiers were driving to the front. There was talk on all sides of a major battle coming up. These men were about to dig new emplacements for field artillery. All day, convoys of tanks, trucks and jeeps were heading into Vukovar. And above the maze, the barrels of field guns were poised to lob shells at the town where neither side appears to want a ceasefire. Alex Thompson, ITN, Vukovar, Eastern Croatia. This afternoon, the Deputy Federal Defence Minister, Admiral Stane Brovit, gave Channel 4 News his first television interview during the war. He said the presence of EC monitors is vital.
The monitors have not been used in the role in which they will be used at present to control the deblocking of the garrisons and the regrouping, or rather withdrawal, of our units and equipment from the garrisons.
Do you believe the country and the army has actually been let down by the politicians?
Well, of course, the politicians are the most responsible.
The most irresponsible?
Irresponsible and responsible for the results of what they have done or undone.
They've failed, haven't they, in terms of preserving the peace over these past months?
They did.
That must be a source of bitter regret to you.
Yes. It is very regretful that at the end of the 20th century, an European country is faced with such conditions as is our country.
If one of the country's most experienced military figures believes that the politicians have let people down badly over this war, what does wider public opinion make of it all? At Belgrade's medical school, opinion is divided. An educated professional section of Serbian life, its opinions mirror a people troubled by war, but not to the point of protesting openly against it. Professor Vasiljevic is one of a group of people opposed to the government, but not to the fighting.
I think that the only solution for a Serbian population in Croatia is, again, to win this very dirty and very bloody war, and then to establish a completely new settlement. But again, definitely as a conqueror, as a winner. Because if we lose, it's going to be the loss, not only of the political power, not only of territories, not only of, but I think now it's the most of the young generation what is aware, it's that this is a question of the existence of the nation.
But out on the campus, doubts about the war are more obvious.
On the behalf of all our generation, I mean here in Serbia, in Belgrade, that we are not for the war. But if we are thrown in that war, we have to survive.
Ceasefire, it's a joke, man.
I feel very sorry about my friends who have to fight there, and I really don't know how the situation can be solved.
But for now, most in Belgrade have little experience of the vicious war still going on just 80 miles away, and precious little faith that their politicians can bring it to a speedy end.
In Yugoslavia, an EC-led convoy heading for the besieged town of Vukovar has come under mortar fire. The convoy carrying emergency food and medical aid to the town, which has been cut off for 50 days, was later forced to turn back after the Federal Army claimed to have found a grenade in one of the trucks. ITN's Paul Davis was travelling with the convoy.
The convoy, laden with desperately needed medical supplies and food, had already been delayed because of fresh fighting around the besieged town of Vukovar. Today began with another setback for the Mercy mission. Their police escort and vehicles carrying members of the EEC observer team involved in a multiple collision. Despite icy roads and fog, they'd been travelling at high speed because of the risk of sniper fire. Another hour had been lost before the convoy was able to move on towards the town that last received food and medicine 48 days ago. As we passed through villages on the road to Vukovar, there were shouts of encouragement and warnings. "You're all going to die," this woman sobbed. "Don't go to Vukovar, it's a trap." Entering Vinkovci, the last town before Vukovar, it became easier to understand her fears. The Croatian National Guard still hold the town, but they've taken a battering. Beyond here, the land, though Croatia, is controlled by the Serbian-dominated Federal Army. It was just as the observers were waiting for instructions to cross the no-man's land that they came under mortar fire. The attack was brief and sent observers, guardsmen and Western journalists who'd accompanied the convoy scrambling for cover, but no one was seriously hurt.
With the situation like this, I mean, we can't risk any more lives. I mean, what's the point, really?
The observers contacted army commanders, demanding an explanation and further guarantees.
If this convoy doesn't get through, there is no sense for the EC monitoring mission to stay in this country.
An hour later, the observers decided to risk the remaining 10 miles into Vukovar, only now they'd be travelling on alone. The army had warned that any Croatian or journalist accompanying them would be shot on sight. The observers treating the mission now as a test of their own credibility. If the convoy can't get through or comes under fire again, the EEC monitors say they might as well pack up and go home. This evening, the convoy returned, having failed to reach Vukovar. The army turned them back after it was claimed a hand grenade had been found in an ambulance. Paul Davis, News at 10 in eastern Croatia.
A convoy carrying emergency food and medical supplies has reached the edge of the besieged Croatian town of Vukovar after 3 days of setbacks caused by fierce fighting. Tonight it's reported to be trapped by an outbreak of shelling around Vukovar. ITN's Paul Davis was with the convoy as it set out from Vinkovci.
An air raid warning was not the most auspicious start to the day as the Mercy convoy prepared for a third time to reach the besieged town of Vukovar. The EEC observers called their drivers together to brief them on the dangers they faced.
The main thing is we want to weed out the drivers that don't have the nerves to go through, because we don't want anybody to abandon the vehicles in the middle of the road.
The ambulances and trucks were laden with medicine, blankets and emergency supplies. The medical teams and drivers, all volunteers, determined to reach the devastated town despite the risk to their own lives.
We must go because we have 15,000 people there and 2,000 of them are children.
The Croatian National Guard was still saying it was too hazardous to attempt the journey. One of the observers was taken up the Vukovar road to see for himself. The Croatian military had launched an attack to secure territory on either side of the road, but was still coming under heavy fire from the Federal Army. These troops had been involved in 24 hours of fighting. They were weary and not optimistic. They admitted they were taking losses and were having difficulty holding their positions.
As long as this bombardment continues, the Croatian National Guardsmen are telling the EEC team it's simply not safe for their convoy to continue. One of the observers appealed to the Croatian side to hold fire in the hope that the Federal Army would also honour the ceasefire. But gunfire continued as the senior observer contacted the convoy. Despite all advice, they were determined to press on, travelling through the battered town of Vinkovci to the new front line, a tiny Croatian village called Nuštar, which has been all but destroyed by the latest fighting. There were shouts of encouragement from the Croatian National Guardsmen, but as they continued into the no man's land, the humanitarian mission travelled on alone. They could only hope that the Federal Army would keep its promise and respect the Red Cross flag under which they were travelling. Paul Davis, ITN, Nuštar, Eastern Croatia.
Yesterday morning, the group of armoured cars left Negoslavski once more in an attempt to meet the EC relief trucks. No more federal troops will be freed from the blockaded barracks in Zagreb unless the relief convoy gets through to Vukovar from here. As we waited, rumours spread of fighting in the immediate area. These soldiers said the Croats were trying to provoke the Federal Army into firing. And shortly after these pictures were taken, 5 grenades were fired by Croats into the area. We were taken up to the last village held by Federal forces. A Federal Army interpreter was waiting to meet the convoy when the fighting erupted.
We came here and this was quite dangerous this morning. It's better for you that you came later because we were witnesses of the fire from the other side, both from tanks, their tanks, which used to be ours, and 2 of them are destroyed, as you have seen. And now we are waiting. Our idea is to stop the firing from both sides and to let the convoy go. That's our wish.
By late Sunday afternoon, most of the shelling had died away. Federal Army officers who would be searching the convoy said it was now only a few miles off. Finally, with barely 1 hour's light left, the convoy appeared. In charge of it, Michel Robert, a French EC observer. Federal officers here wanted the medical supplies at the front of the convoy to split off and the food to follow on later. But after 5 days, Michel Robert's firmly in charge. No, he said, we go into Vukovar as one convoy or we don't go at all. One of his team explained the situation.
JNA searched our convoy and there was no arms whatsoever. There was some discussion about some petrol which could be used for military use also, so we left that behind. And it was a very friendly, thorough search and there were no problems.
After some time, the Federal Army agreed, after liaison with Defence Ministry officials, and with that, the EC convoy finally entered the outskirts of bombed-out Vukovar. We were the only reporting team able to witness its passage towards the Federal Army barracks, and from there into a rapidly assembled dormitory guarded by Federal soldiers, with orders to shoot on sight anyone outside after dark. All night, intermittent shelling and machine gun fire continued. This morning, yet more talks between Commander Lukic, who runs the Federal Army barracks in Vukovar, and Robert Michel, in charge of the EC observers. The sticking point was still which parts of the convoy would go where, but also which roads they would use between the Federal Army barracks, then the no man's land, half of which is controlled by Serbian irregulars and half by the Croatians. Meanwhile, in the courtyard of the disused barracks, the convoy, almost exclusively consisting of cars and coaches from Osijek, stood waiting to go. Then, on orders from Belgrade, the JNA, the Federal Army, began a systematic search of every vehicle. Each box, every bag of clothing, each medical consignment, it all had to come off. Even individual tins of food were opened. It was, said Michel Robert, a forced search.
This is a checking by force because according to the agreement signed yesterday or the day before, only one check of this convoy had to be made. This checking has been made yesterday afternoon by the GNA when we reached their front line. And now this unit have received an order from Belgrade from a high-ranking general to make a second checking.
Shortly after 10 o'clock, the EC convoy left the barracks, but instead of going into Vukovar, it went out across country again. The Croatian forces said they wouldn't let it further into Vukovar because that would mean removing their mines and booby traps and thus taking away their defences. They said the federal forces were using the EC convoy as a human shield. And so another village and another set of protracted negotiations. As somebody said here this morning, this is what happens when humanitarianism comes up against the military on one side and politics on the other. So far, the progress has been painfully slow. This is one of the main barriers to the convoy in Croatian eyes. These 120mm field guns have pounded Vukovar for 2 months now. Ceasefires have come, ceasefires gone, but almost every day these federal soldiers have selected shells from the ammunition boxes. They've pulled out a new detonator for each one, and in the time-honoured ritual of long-range slaughter, they have primed their weapons. For weeks, they have responded to the coordinates shouted from their commanding officer a few yards behind. Without seeing the destruction 3 miles away, they have waited the repeated order to fire. That euphoria is perhaps short-lived. Most of the soldiers here know that only politicians can soothe Croatia's agony in any lasting way, though many still do believe in Yugoslavia and in one federal army.
We are trying to save Yugoslavia. The army is made only for that, to save Yugoslavia from inside enemies or from outside enemies. This time it's inside enemy.
An armoured vehicle broadcasting a warning to the people of Negoslavci not to leave their village whilst the fighting continues. This is the nearest village to Vukovar and has become a garrison for the Federal Army. It's from around this village that day and night the artillery pounds Vukovar. Local farmers welcome the soldiers, saying the roar of the guns is the sound of liberation. Every day we were there, at least 2 grenades landed in Negoslavci, proof that whoever fired first, the Federal Army, was being attacked. In this house, a mother, daughter and her boyfriend were having lunch when a grenade smashed into the home. Shrapnel peppered the wall. And this is a dirty war. This ambulance was shot up in the centre of Vukovar whilst trying to retrieve casualties in street-to-street fighting. Alex Thompson, ITN, Vukovar, Eastern Croatia.
A group of British volunteer soldiers has moved up to the front line in Yugoslavia's civil war. They've enlisted with the forces of the Republic in Croatia, fighting Serbian and Federal Army troops between Vinkovci and Vukovar. There's been close hand-to-hand fighting southwest of Zagreb, near the town of Karlovac. Paul Davis is in Croatia.
It could be the bandit country of South Armagh, a British soldier on patrol constantly alert for sniper attack. In fact, this is the front line of Yugoslavia's internal conflict, with the British soldiers on the breakaway Republican side. Danny Kingston from Cheltenham, one of a small group of foreign volunteers who've enlisted to fight with the Croatian army.
This isn't just one of those other Balkan wars. This isn't just one of those Slav quarrels. This is a nation's struggle for independence. I mean, this is history being made here.
The volunteers, who include 3 Britons, an Austrian, a Finn and a Frenchman, have been billeted in the gymnasium of an abandoned school in the embattled town of Vinkovci. They are all former professional soldiers and insist they are not mercenaries but are fighting for a cause. Today, patrolling the streets of Vinkovci, the volunteers had their first experience of conflict, coming under sniper attack. A former British Army paratrooper who wanted to be known only as Will said more foreign recruits are needed.
We hope there'll be some more people out here, as in professional soldiers.
If people are going to come out here then and help the Croatians, then it should only be professional soldiers. They don't have the organisation to train people from scratch. They've got enough problems training their own people from scratch.
While the British volunteers were moved up to Croatia's eastern front, there was more fierce fighting in the south. Just outside the garrison town of Karlovac, members of the Croatian National Guard involved in street battles with soldiers of the Serbian-led Federal Army.
The leaders of Serbia and Croatia may be talking ceasefire with President Gorbachev in Moscow, but tonight there are reports of fierce fighting around at least 3 major towns in this breakaway republic. Paul Davis, News at 10, Croatia.
Another ceasefire, the 10th, has been agreed by all sides in Yugoslavia's civil war at a European Community Peace Conference in The Hague. The Dutch Foreign Minister, Mr. Hans van den Broek, said the fighting had to stop immediately to allow political progress to be made. Lord Carrington called it a cautionary step forward. On the ground in Croatia, the ceasefire seemed mainly to have been ignored. In the eastern Croatian town of Osijek, there's been no break in the fighting for 24 hours.
Early this morning, the old Croatian town of Osijek ablaze, the result of the previous day's bombing attacks. The new day offers no respite for Osijek's war-weary citizens. Yet another air raid alarm. People who'd only just ventured out of their homes after the nighttime attack take refuge in the shelter under the town's main square. This has become a daily feature of life here, waiting for hours, listening to the bombardment above, wondering what will be left of Osijek by the time it's safe to venture outside again. For 2 days now, Osijek has come under air attack. Croatia does not have an effective air force of its own, so the Serbian-led Federal Air Force has the freedom of the skies. In the last 48 hours, the town has taken a pounding. Not everyone was safe in the shelters when this latest attack occurred. 3 people died and 53 were injured yesterday.
The patients were our first priority. We didn't care about our own safety. It was only after 5 days, when we sat down, that we realized we'd been in danger.
They may be talking peace in The Hague today, in these wards with so many injuries inflicted after 8 or 9 so-called ceasefires. They ran out of such optimism a long time ago. Paul Davis, News at 10, Osijek General Hospital.
The jeeps of Federal Army commanders of the Vukovar area left their base just after 7 this morning, moving along tracks that are the only supply lines open across the minefields. They took up position facing the checkpoint that marks the end of the Federal Army's control zone and waited. At 8 a.m, the convoy arrived carrying medical staff from the French aid agency Médecins Sans Frontières, a 16-vehicle group with 7 trucks to evacuate the wounded, believed to be more than 200. "I'm in a great hurry, gentlemen," the EC observer in control told the Federal Army. 1 mile out from Vukovar, a Federal tank group intended to meet and escort the convoy. Its soldiers dismantled their barricades in preparation. But it never arrived. Instead, the convoy had taken a different route to the north. Furious Federal commanders sent in their tanks to block that track to confront the convoy when it came out of Vukovar. Across the fields, the smoke of an artillery strike on the town proved that the ceasefire did not hold up today. Médecins Sans Frontières said they'd been trapped by shelling in the town. They were trapped again when they came out by Federal Army tanks who insisted they travel by their route. So the convoy bounced over the fields. It could only have increased the pain of the 109 injured civilians on board these trucks. Michel Robert's patience was running thin.
And my own purpose today is to lead a relief convoy with wounded people. That's all. And to withdraw from this town as much as possible wounded people.
And inside the trucks in great pain they waited. Finally, the convoy rolled out past the Federal lines, apparently on its way smoothly. And then this. An explosion near to the front of the convoy. A truck full of injured people had hit a mine between the Federal and Croatian lines. The driver and 2 members of the aid team were blown clear of the cab. Doctors attended to them where they'd fallen. Next to the truck, another mine lay, hampering rescuers. Both sides call this a dirty war, and what more compelling image of that could there be than 3 people in a humanitarian convoy blown up by a mine on their way out of Vukovar.
A relief convoy carrying hundreds of wounded people from the besieged Croatian town of Vukovar has finally got through to safety. It was delayed yesterday after a truck hit a landmine. Tonight, heavy fighting was reported around Vukovar and other parts of Croatia.
The wounded from Vukovar, who survived the siege of the Croatian town and the mined road out of it, were transferred today to specialist hospitals where their injuries can be treated. Another 100 wounded have been left behind in Vukovar. EEC observers say it's too risky to carry out a repeat of the Mercy mission.
It will be a long time, if ever, we will take part in another convoy. There's a lot of negotiation and discussion to be done, because obviously this has been much too dangerous.
The EEC observers can hardly have been pleased to discover that when Federal Army troops evacuated their barracks in Zagreb yesterday, they left behind many nasty surprises. Mines and other booby traps intended for the Croatians, who are the barracks' new occupants. Dozens of artillery pieces were abandoned by the Serbian-led troops as they withdrew, but these too have been mined and sabotaged. No matter how great the risk, the Croatian soldiers will have to work their way past the booby traps, as the guns left behind here are desperately needed to be used against their former owners.
Croatian National Guards on the last stage of a counter-offensive to reopen the road to a besieged town. After 2 days of fierce fighting, they believe their enemy has withdrawn. But there is only one way to know for sure: the nerve-wracking process of checking every small village and farm. The guards say this is worse than the shooting, knowing that every cautious step could take them into a sniper's sights.
The Croatian forces have recaptured this village, but they believe the Serbian-led troops have fled just a few hundred yards into the woods that surround this area.
We join the Croatian guards as they move down the newly captured road into Pakrac. The town has been under siege by federal forces for more than 2 months and shows the scars. At first sight, it appears to be a ghost town. No one on the streets, almost every building wrecked. We discovered the Croatian garrison taking cover among the devastation. An officer showed us his battered headquarters.
This is police station.
The bullet-ridden building, proof that the Croatians' hold on the town is a tenuous one, and we were to discover why. A sniper's bullet aimed from a building a few hundred yards away.
This house is the terrorist.
Every few minutes, the Croatian soldiers came under sniper fire. Tonight, they fear the Federal Army will launch a major offensive to once again sever the vital road link into the town. Paul Davis News at 10, Pakrac, Croatia.
Good evening. Yugoslavia's Federal Army and the breakaway Republic of Croatia agreed to a new ceasefire tonight, but they're still fighting in several areas across the country. The agreement to end it, the 13th ceasefire, is due to take effect at 6 o'clock tomorrow evening. Today, the fighting in Croatia was especially fierce in the key town of Vukovar, which has been under siege now for 85 days. It was there earlier today that ITN's reporter David Chater was shot in the back and seriously injured. He and his camera team had been with federal troops taking part in the battle for Vukovar. ITN's producer in Belgrade, Andrew Tilley, sent us this report.
They've been fighting in Vukovar for 3 months. It's a terrifying place, where everyone feels he's constantly in the sights of the sniper, the lone gunman who sits patiently for hours waiting for his prey. They say this graveyard was the front line today. A single shot from a Croatian gunman and the Serbian troops respond with a barrage. Hundreds of rounds in the general direction of where the shot was fired. And across the front line, a rifle grenade. It's a frightening, exhausting daily grind, and it shows on the faces of the mainly conscript army, soldiers who were told the town would fall in days, who've been here for months. Terrifying too for the residents of the town. They've been in cellars for months, feeding on each other's fears of what the enemy will do to them. More die every day, but neither side will reveal the casualty figures. David Chater and his crew moved into an area taken by the federal troops only hours earlier. They were filming a Serbian gunman when they came under fire. The team moved into a church when the sniper fired again, hitting David in the back. He was fully conscious and talked to the soldiers who came to his aid. Then, coming under more sniper fire, the rescuers ran for safety, into the ambulance and on to the military hospital in Belgrade. Andrew Tilley, News at 10, Yugoslavia.
Tonight, David Chater is in intensive care in the military hospital in Belgrade. He's undergone a 5-hour operation and doctors say his condition is serious but not critical. David, who's 38 and married, has worked for ITN for 13 years. The camera crew who were with him, John Martin and John Boyce, were both unhurt. They are now also in Belgrade.
This is the second day of the 13th ceasefire. It is also the 92nd day of the siege and bombardment of Vukovar. It's been said before, it's worth repeating, but nothing like it has been seen in Europe since 1945. Nothing and no one has escaped its devastation. Every day, soldiers have told us that Vukovar is about to fall. They have been saying it for a fortnight, but maybe now it's true. Perhaps tomorrow, perhaps Tuesday. The Serbian irregulars and federal troops have now surrounded the last remaining Croat fighters, cutting off their escape across the Danube. Because its troops are now fighting house to house, even floor to floor, the Federal Army can no longer use its long-range artillery to hit the town centre. With this kind of fighting at close quarters, the casualties are high. According to intercepted radio transmissions, there are some Croats who are willing to surrender, but only on condition it is to the Federal Army. They are terrified of the Serbs and what they will do to both Croat soldier and Croat civilian if the fighting stops. They fear a massacre, and that is why they fight suicidally on. Some families have quite literally been blown out of their hideouts in sewers and cellars. This man was one. The soldiers asked him, "Are you a Serb?" He answered, "Yes, but what does it matter? It was the Croats who hit me and saved me." There are some who watch this demolition and wonder why, just to wipe a small country town off the map. Perhaps the simple answer is that the army considers the Croats should be punished for what they have done in breaking up Yugoslavia by its unilateral declaration of independence. But to the Croats, this town has been a symbol of its defiance, a symbol of its independence. In strategic terms, its fall will mean nothing, but to the Croats, it's bound to have a devastating effect upon their resolve to continue this war. Michael Nicholson, ITN, on the outskirts of Vukovar.
Today, the eastern Croatian town of Vukovar finally fell to the Federal Yugoslav army after a siege of 68 days.
An armoured convoy escorted the Red Cross jeep through no man's land, its tattered flag a hopeful guarantee of safe passage. At the agreed rendezvous point, 3 Croatian commanders were waiting to be assured by the Red Cross's Nicholas Bosinger that he would act as intermediary and guarantor of their safety. The two sides met at a remote farmhouse, the Croats issuing only one condition, that they would surrender only to the Federal Army and not to the Serbs who they feared would massacre them. The surrender agreed, tanks were then sent up to clear the road of barricades. Shortly after 3 o'clock, the Croat commander, a Federal Army major by his side, radioed the order for the exodus to begin. In the distance, with the sounds of the guns behind them, they came trickling out towards us, shuffling, limping, weeping. 4,000 refugees from the once pretty, bustling market town of Vukovar. "97 days and nights they had suffered in the ruins of their town, a bombardment like no other in Europe this half-century. They had lived this last month trapped underground in the darkness of cellars and sewers, only hearing, only guessing at the death and devastation that was above them.
They have killed all our friends, and we are not guilty. We didn't want the war. We only love people. We don't kill them, and we still don't hate. We still don't hate.
Then came the Croatian fighters to surrender themselves and their arms. Young men, some very young, who had fought an army of tanks, artillery and fighter bombers and had somehow managed to survive the day. Men who could not have known that their enthusiasm for Croatian independence would finally lead to this. And so the Battle of Vukovar is over, and with it, we hope, the suffering, the 3 months of suffering of these people. But remember that this is just a local truce with fighting still going on across the country. And as the military are frequently reminding us, one ceasefire doesn't make a peace. Michael Nicholson, News at 10, Vukovar.
The mainly Serbian forces of Yugoslavia's federal army have been rooting out the last Croatian fighters still defending Vukovar. Croatia's government surrendered Vukovar yesterday. The mass evacuation of the city continued between the battles. The federal troops today captured the town's hospital, where 800 patients are being treated. Many have suffered the overcrowded conditions throughout the 3 months of siege.
Parts of Vukovar are still burning, but nobody cares. There is still occasional gunfire, but nobody listens. They have only one thing to do now, and that's to get out. However they can, with whatever they can carry, young and old, those who can still walk, and those that cannot. Refugees in search of refuge. The dead, and there are many more than we can show, are left where they fell, unburied. There is a report tonight that 40 children have been found killed in a cellar. These are Serbs. The army claims the Croats murdered them in the final hours of the fighting. The International Red Cross says it cannot reach the hospital because the fighting continues there. That's nonsense. It's all over. Those on the outside can come in now. They should know that those struggling to survive here need help now and massively. If they don't get it, many alive today will be dead by the time it does arrive. That much is certain. Michael Nicholson, News at 10, Vukovar.
Red Cross officials in the Croatian city of Vukovar are today trying to reach hundreds of people wounded in the fighting there. The Red Cross say their efforts to reach the city's hospital are being hampered by landmines laid by Croatian militia, some of whom are still refusing to surrender. There are also fears that plans to evacuate the wounded may be postponed because of fresh fighting in the town of Osijek, 20 miles to the northeast of Vukovar.
The army has begun emptying the hospital here. Not the wounded, they're leaving that to others, but the able-bodied, the old, the women, the children, taking them in convoy to an assembly camp just outside of town. All the young men are picked out and taken away to be interrogated as prisoners of war. From this camp, families minus their sons and young husbands will be transported to safe towns of their choice further inside Croatia.
If fighters surrender, then the other side can consider them as prisoners. I mean, we are not a power to forbid that the army is taking prisoners among the wounded. What we want is that the wounded are protected, are cared for, and that we can register them and follow them up wherever they are, in jail or in another hospital. So that's our main goal.
The evacuation of armor and artillery has also begun, including the first of the tanks that did so much to reduce this town to rubble. Michael Nicholson, ITN, Vukovar.
The ITN reporter David Chater, who was shot last week covering the fighting in Yugoslavia, has recovered sufficiently to give his first interview. He spoke of his recollection of the shooting itself and his recovery to Nick Glass from ITN's Channel 4 News, a close friend and colleague. David is still attached to drip feeds, but he's made good progress and expects to be able to leave hospital in a few weeks' time.
first visit for David from friends and colleagues. He was moved from intensive care on Monday. His first words, a thank you.
You got me out of here.
Well, with a lot of help from other people. They got you out amazingly quickly. Remarkable, but it's a heck of a shock, I must say. How are you feeling?
Very, very weak.
Yeah.
The wound to his stomach and back was very serious, but he has youth, spirit and the Cheta constitution on his side.
Getting better.
Yeah.
Each hour.
Each hour.
Each hour.
And
yes.
the better he gets, the more
improving, yes.
And the better he gets, the more he complains, I expect. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like his wife Mel, anyone who knows him well were encouraged when David began complaining about the nurses, stormtroopers he called them. David was shot on Friday afternoon while covering the horrific battle for Vukovar.
As I tipped over when the bullet hit, I didn't know what it was. I thought it could have been a mortar or anything. I thought suddenly I'm not in touch with my legs. And I'm on the ground. And I was terrified that the spine had been hit or something serious had happened. But then I started feeling my toes as they dragged me away. I realised my legs were coming with me, so I was very pleased. Then the pain hit. But John was with me, and they got me in very quickly. And quite frankly, I came around essentially in very good hands. So I'm feeling good. The prognosis is good.
What do you remember about the journey from Vukovar?
I remember it was it's the most exciting helicopter ride I've had, actually. I'd do anything for a helicopter ride, but I didn't do that one again. It was great. It was great. I knew I was getting there fast. I was staying conscious. Saw a bit of the countryside. Couldn't see... Boise, you weren't there, were you? No.
Not sure.
But they were really taking very, very good care of me. They were really pushing me through so fast. And then, memories came back. If only I just turned round at a third of a second beforehand, or hadn't been thinking about my piece to camera. What reporter doesn't? Then I might have missed it, and he might have missed me, but he didn't.
You've had a lot of messages here.
Yeah, a lot of old friends have been in touch. That's really good news. I'd like to say thanks. I'm actually fine, and I'll be back on my feet, hopefully within 3 weeks, but not back at work. I'm looking forward to some beach.
You'll be able to halve your alcohol consumption.
I think I'm going to have to, aren't I? Yeah. See, everything's got a silver lining, hasn't it? It's healthy for me.
Serbia and Croatia have agreed to a United Nations-sponsored ceasefire to start tomorrow. After a meeting in Geneva, the UN envoy Cyrus Vance said it must be a genuine ceasefire and not just another meaningless declaration which is ignored. In Yugoslavia, Croatian radio says the town of Osijek has come under rocket attack for the 5th successive day, while civilians returning to the town of Vukovar have discovered the first mass graves of victims killed in the fighting.
Even as the Geneva talks got underway, the Federal Army was on the move again. A column of armour leaving the area, pushing deeper into Croatia. Their sights then firmly set on Osijek, 10 miles down the road. For these Federal Army soldiers, the victors of Vukovar, deploying today from the town, the war is not over. This is the 14th ceasefire since the start of the fighting. In Vukovar this afternoon, the survivors of the siege had more pressing concerns. Milena Šerbić was returning to what was left of her home at number 20 Lenin Street. What she found was every bit as bad as she had feared. Her husband had been killed in the fighting. Now she was back to salvage what she could from the ruins of the bungalow that had been her home for the last 21 years. In the garage, what remained of the family's most prized possession. What she managed to recover with the tail fins of the mortar shells that had destroyed both her home and her life. It was perhaps worse for those who'd not seen the town since the fighting began. Their children totally unprepared for the sound that had been so much part of life here. Tonight, the Federal Army began uncovering the graves of those who fell in the fighting. Reports say up to 5,000 people may have died in the defense of Vukovar. As the focus of this war moves north to Osijek, the coming weeks will test not only the spirit of the Croatian defenders, but also the determination of the European community to broker a peace that will last. Peter Sharp, ITN in Croatia.
The name Vukovar should, in a future dictionary, become a synonym for senseless destruction. The violence started here last autumn after a football match. For 86 days, the Yugoslav army and local Serbs and Croats shelled, bombed and scattered bullets into every building, killing some 3,000 civilians. Like in Sarajevo today, it seemed that nothing was sacred and that the killing would never stop. Now, despite the unrepaired desolation which resembles Beirut and post-war Berlin, as many as 40,000 people live in the ruins. The Croats have gone, and half of those here are Serbian refugees driven out of places where they didn't fit the ethnic picture. This elderly couple fled from their home in Croatia last summer, and after periods in refugee camps, the Serb authorities offered them this house in Vukovar. It belonged to Croats who resisted the occupation but then left. Being Serbs, the couple say they now feel safe.
I think it would be best if this were part of Serbia, because there is a large Serbian population. But I'm not sure. I'm not from here. I come from far away. I'm not sure who it belongs to. We'd prefer to go home, but now there is the Ustaše, the Croatian government in authority there. We don't know if they will accept us or not.
Next door, a Serbian refugee family who've lived here since March. They had been without a home since September last year, when their home in Croatia was burnt down. When that happened, Marin Ostoja, a former hotel manager, joined the Yugoslav army for 5 months. He still has his uniform and says he'll fight again if his family are threatened.
We are forced to take over the houses of the Ustashi because they looted our house, burnt it and destroyed it. Therefore I and all of us must take over their homes.
Dozens of displaced families live in this street amid the shattered buildings of Vukovar. After the hardship they've endured, they feel the world is unfairly biased against Serbs.
However much the world community pressures us, we Serbs are not mean people. We can easily sit down and talk, but the other nations don't want to do it because they have enormous support from Europe, the USA, Australia and the Islamic countries.
Though the rest of the world considers this area part of Croatia, the words Western Serbia daubed on this road sign show the reality on the ground. Public buildings display the Serbian coat of arms, and the authorities call themselves the Serbian Republic of Krajina. They've even printed their own currency, used alongside the Serbian dinar. And there's not much the United Nations Protection Force can do about that. Their white vehicles and blue berets are much in evidence throughout Krajina, but they're only here to ensure the ceasefire lasts. And because the Serbs are firmly in control of the area, fighting has virtually ended. The UN have managed to lock up heavy weapons and tanks from both sides into hangars and barns. But the next stage, the disarming of militias and civilians, is causing more problems.
Refugees coming from other parts. We think that they receive sometimes some weapons here when they are here, when they are coming here, and okay, then that's the same problem. They are not allowed to wear these weapons.
But weapons are worn quite openly in this part of the world, the legacy of a year in which power has been gained at the point of a gun. The people of Krajina say they're heavily armed because they mean to defend what they've won.
Krajina will not surrender. We are Serbs and will remain Serbs. Serbia is our mother country. Write that down. We are all Serbs. Serbs in Krajina and Serbs in Serbia. Serbs will not surrender Krajina.
Ordinary life does go on, but with the threat of violence always present. It's the price people who have driven out their neighbors will have to pay everywhere in former Yugoslavia. In Bosnia, just as much as in Croatia.
At present, there's a Serbian Republic on the other side of the River Danube behind me, and another Serbian Republic, Krajina, where I'm standing now. Krajina was carved out of Croatia with so much bloodshed that the Serbians feel they've paid for it with their lives. It's that kind of problem which is going to be hardest to solve at the London Conference and its successors. Gabi Rado, ITN, Krajina.
A year ago, the worst conflict in what had been Yugoslavia wasn't in Bosnia now, but in Croatia. Vukovar was under Serbian siege, the Croatian half of its people soon to be driven out. Today, a United Nations brokered plan to get them back to Vukovar by September 30 has had to be abandoned. The local UN commander told ITN they'd be killed and that there'd be a bloodbath. The siege of Vukovar, which lasted 3 months until mid-November, left 3,000 people dead. The Croatians who survived were allowed out of the city to safer parts of Croatia. A United Nations protected zone was set up under Cyrus Vance's peace plan. Heavy artillery was moved back, but the UN failed to get rival paramilitary groups to disarm. For this special report, Andrew Simmons found that even if there was a safe way back to Vukovar for the Croatians, they'd find no welcome there.
Nothing was sacred in the Battle of Vukovar. This is no longer a town. It is a contorted monument symbolizing hatred, suffering, and death. There wasn't a single building which escaped the 3-month barrage. People had to live underground in cellars to have any hope of survival. 45,000 had homes here, half of them Serbian, half Croatian. Less than a quarter of that number now try to live in what is left. All but a few are Serbs. The Croats have been forced out of the self-declared Serbian Republic. There's a plan, though, for thousands to return by the end of the month. Mira Jerkovic is a Serb who lost 7 relatives in the fighting, including her husband shot dead in the street outside, and her father murdered here in the rubble of what was her home for the past 27 years. She says she could never live alongside Croats again.
In this situation, we cannot live together anymore. They have done many bad things to us.
For these children who start the autumn term in a restaurant converted into a schoolroom, the trauma of the fighting is no longer talked about. But even they understand the significance of the redrawn map and the absence of so many teachers and classmates.
We explained that their Croatian teachers had gone. They answered, we don't want them back. For their Croatian friends, they feel sorry that they can no longer play together.
Their original school should really be knocked down. Like everywhere else in Vukovar, it was a target. But instead of rebuilding, there are attempts at repairs in the town which will be named in children's history books alongside Dresden and Stalingrad in the Second World War. In 1945, though, everyone knew the war was over. Here, amongst the rubble and despair of Vukovar, there is an eerie tension. The rebuilding can't begin until there's a political settlement. And UN peacekeepers say Croats cannot be returned because the peace process is at stalemate. The big guns may be off the streets, but paramilitaries with automatic weapons refuse to hand them over. Regular police are the only ones complying with UN regulations restricting them to sidearms.
Every day they are shooting in the first line. People is too scared. You must understand.
They don't trust each other. There's an illness in this society. And because they possess so many weapons, this is a huge problem.
It is 10 months since the fighting stopped. A harsh winter lies ahead. Like everyone else in Vukovar, Mira Jerkovic cannot retrieve any semblance of normality because she is unsure whether the fighting could start again. The only certainty here, where the graves of unnamed Serbs and Croats are side by side, is that those who survived what happened will never forgive each other. Andrew Simmons, News at 10, Vukovar.
Nice camera.
Bravo.